Hi, shalom everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Crossing Boundaries. Today, unfortunately, Aziz won't be able to join us. He has a power outage in his neighborhood. He just texted me that he might be able to join us later. So crossing fingers, crossing boundaries. We called our episode today, I'm Still Standing, and that's because we're very hopeful. We're usually optimistic travel company, and we're hoping that everyone, including the economy, will be able to recover from the COVID-19 effects. And we're hosting two business leaders, one Palestinian and one Israeli. We're going to be starting with Yoram Yaacovi, who is actually a family friend. We've seen a lot of soccer matches together, Yoram, maybe some of them live, some of them on the huge screen at your home. But today we're talking about something else. I'll just say a couple words. Yoram was the general manager of Microsoft Israel, and the interesting story, after you left Microsoft, actually you traveled to 10 different metropolitans or big cities around the world. So that relates nicely with our travel with our travel stories here. And Yoram, you're an entrepreneur. You take part in a lot of Palestinian and Israeli or Arab Israeli and Jewish Israeli initiatives. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing today?
Yeah, first I want to say that Kim's dad, who is a good friend of mine, is the only person I know on the planet that is more crazy about soccer than I am, which is, I'm sure Kim can acknowledge. So I spent many years at Microsoft, more than 20 years, a lot of them in Seattle, in the headquarters of the company, and the last 10 years in Israel. My last role in the last 7 years, I was running the Microsoft Israel Research and Development, which today is about 1,100 engineers in Herzliya, Haifa, and Nazareth. I opened the Nazareth to cater for the Israeli Arab engineers, and the site, the R&D center today generates over $1 billion of revenue for Microsoft from the products that we develop here in Israel. So that's what I've done until a couple of years ago. And since then, I'm working some of my time with a Chinese VC, a venture capital fund. Actually, the VC leader in China, it's a huge Chinese investment firm. I'm scouting deals from them in Israel. So if you have any interesting deals, let me know. Any interesting investments, let me know. In addition, I'm helping a few startups in the roles of advisory or director in these startups. But maybe the most important thing I do is I put it under, helping the community. I always thought that idea of including Arabs, whether Israeli Arabs or Palestinians in high tech, is super important. Mainly because I usually look for the win in life. And if you include Israeli Arabs and Palestinians in high tech, you achieve 3 wins. One win is for themselves, because usually high tech roles are good income roles. So it will make their life better. Second, there is a win for the high tech ecosystem, because in high tech, for those of you who are not in high tech, we are always in shortage of people. So we need more people, we need more engineers. And the third win is for the region. I think that the region, our region, has been famous in people fighting for land and the grabbing land and so on. While I can tell you, because I know Israelis and I know Palestinians pretty well, what's really strong in this region is not the land, it's the human talent or the human capital. There are actually amazing people on both sides. And one of the reasons I know is that in 2009, I opened the first Microsoft team in Ramallah. The team has moved 2 years ago to Rawabi, and I visit them once every few months. and they're just amazing engineers and amazing people. So I'll stop here. I mean, I can talk more about this. I can talk about this forever, but I'll stop here, see if you want to hear more.
Yes, I do, definitely. First of all, thank you for the amazing work that you're doing across our country. I wanted to ask, how was the technological sector affected by COVID? I mean, seeing my husband at home, he works in cyber security, and it seems like actually that's a sector that is going. Corona came as a favor because people are sitting at home and hackers are probably going crazy. But how has Corona affected the technological sector today?
I think that overall Corona had a positive impact on technology, even if we don't see it right away, because obviously some people were laid off or went to leave of absence and so on. At the end of the day, Corona made us understand that we need technology more than we thought. Okay, for example, without technology, we could not have continued to work. Maybe we could not have had this call without technology. So I think the technology helped us understand first on the working from remote. We are able to work from remote with Zoom. I know how many people were skeptical about working remotely. I know how many companies were skeptical about allowing their employees to work remotely because they want them to be in the office. But at the end of the day, I can tell you, maybe I'm rushing ahead a little bit here. I spent the last couple of months with a few other people writing a paper, which I will later share on the chat of the conference of the session, about the post-Corona opportunities for Israel. So what we're trying to do is saying, we have Corona now and we suffer from Corona, but at some point in time it will go away or we'll figure it out. And once it happens, what will be the opportunities that will remain after the Corona is gone? So I have a whole paper about it. It's actually quite tedious, maybe 14, 15 pages. And I also created a version of it, which is not specific for Israel, which I can share with you. And the reason I'm talking about it is because one of the things I did in order to write the paper, it's not just me and a few other people. We interviewed lots of people. And I can tell you that many CEOs of companies that we interviewed in Israel say that some of them did not allow employees to work remotely before Corona. And now they said that they're going to allow employees to work as much as they want outside, from home or from remote. All the companies we talked to say that they actually felt that employee productivity is actually better when they work from remote. Some of them were for some of them it was just intuition. They felt that way. But some companies, like for example, Taboola, who is a significant Israeli tech company, some company actually measured it. And they can show in numbers that productivity actually went higher when employees work remotely. Obviously, the data is only 3 months long. It could be that over time it will change, but the last 3 months, they've seen more productivity. The bottom line is that almost every company that I talk to is saying, we're gonna allow employees to work from home, even if we did not allow this before. And they also believe that in addition to the productivity improvements that I already mentioned, they can actually save costs. They can save costs because they may not need all the offices that they need today. Okay, they can save costs. And now I hope I'm not you pointing at Majdi directly. They can save costs because they don't have to travel as much for business. And by the way,
actually Majdi is the perfect example for what you're talking about, because the whole office is remote in the US and here in Israel and Palestine. So it's, I guess I'll also just say hi to Aziz that joined us. Yes. Welcome, Aziz. Looks like the lights are back on. Happy to have you back. So actually, Majdi, it's funny. I started working at Majdi when I was living in Brooklyn, and when we were thinking of coming back to Israel, it was an easy move, or not, easy, but easier to move because there's no physical office that's holding me back.
It's actually interesting. I read about this in the paper. As I wrote my blog, I read some papers, and the way Majdi works is there is a term for it. It's called headquarterless of companies. So there's actually quite few companies that don't have any office and they work remotely. And one of the things that was interesting about this company is that they're saying that even I think that one of the things that they think is very important is that everyone is on an equal ground. For example, if I am remote and my colleagues are not remote, they sit together in a room and I am far away and I am disadvantaged. So what they're saying is that even if you have an office and you have a meeting, everyone should take the meeting from their offices and not from the meeting room, so that everyone is on an equal ground, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so just back to. So I think that in general, I think business travel is going to suffer, because I think I'm talking to people that say we thought we need to travel to our customer to win the deal, and we don't. We just win the deal without it. On the other hand, I at least I don't think that leisure travel is gonna suffer. I think people are still gonna want to go see places, but that's my yeah.
I think people want to travel for business, maybe not as much as they used to, but yeah, it will definitely be affected. And I can say about a headquarterless company that it's something that is still not 100% accepted. The whole concept is usually strange to people when I tell them we don't really have an office. I'm working from home. They always ask, but where's your office? But where's the headquarters? So that's funny. I have to ask. I mean, you're talking about technology that actually these companies understood that they are more productive. So is there actually good news through COVID? Are there any developments that we'll see after COVID that we can say, oh, wow, that happened through this troubled time?
Yeah, so I think if I can ask Shannon to share the slide about the trends, which I sent you earlier. I mean, one of the things that I try to do in this blog that I was talking about is to try and figure out, once COVID is out, what changes we'll see and how to leverage these changes. So I'll show you a slide in a second of the trends, but what I will not show you, just because of lack of time, is for each of these trends, not this one, the other one. For each of these trends, I have recommendations of what governments or companies should do to leverage these trends or opportunities. So you can see in the slide now that we already talked about working from remote and from home. I think that companies must leverage the idea that people can work from home and it's actually more productive, and costs can be saved substantially. My daughter works in San Francisco, and their husband works for San Francisco as well. They both work for high-tech companies, and both were told that they should not expect to go back to the office. They work remotely from home. They should not expect to go back to the office until at least December. And both companies have started to return leases of offices in San Francisco. So if you think the number, by the way, the number in New York, I don't have the number for San Francisco, the number in New York for the cost of an office for one employee for a year is about $17,000 a year. So think if a company can even half of its offices, I mean, we're talking about huge savings. So I'm sure we're going to see this trend. And by the way, not everyone can work from home. Some people don't have the infrastructure or the equipment. So I believe we will see what I call community hubs, which mean small hubs from which you can work. Actually, where I live in Kfar Hes, which is a small village, there is now a hub from which people can go work in the morning. So instead of driving to Tel Aviv, they go to this little hub. They can use the desk and a small office there, and they can work from there. They don't have to travel to the office. We already talked about doing business online. I think we're going to see a significant decline of business travel because people understood that they can do business online. Telemedicine, this is probably the most obvious one in this list because we know that we have to be able to treat people remotely when they're not, we cannot touch them sometime because of the virus, or it's just simpler. The Chinese investor I'm working with we invested 2 years ago in an Israeli company called Taito Care. Taito Care is a company that has a small device that you put in at home. And through this device, the device has probes for the mouth, for the ear, for the nose, for the chest. And through the device, in most cases, you don't have to go to the doctor. The doctor connects to the device. He said, plug it here, plug it there, and that's it. And people with kids, for example, love it because they don't have to drag the kids to the doctor and so on. So this device has now obviously become in high demand because in Corona days, you actually want to use this device because you don't want to get close to people. You want them to be able to test themselves. So telemedicine is going to be big. I'm sure it's not like a big surprise to anyone. Sharing of health data. I mean, one of the reasons we are slow in finding either a medicine or a vaccine for Corona is that because we don't have all the health data online and it's scattered between multiple databases. So I think that any companies that will work or create solutions around looking at lots of health data and providing wisdom and insights from that data are going to benefit. Online services. It's not that we have not used online services before. I mean, we used Netflix before the Corona and we shopped online before Corona. But think for a second, how many people shopped for groceries online before Corona? You know, maybe a couple of percent. And many people have not. Yeah, and many people have not done that because they were afraid that they didn't know how to do it. Corona, they didn't have a choice. And I bet you that it will stay after Corona. Okay.
I hope not as much, though. I know from friends, for example, in New York that waited a month and a half to get their shopping list at their house. But yeah. Yeah,
but again, I think the online services will improve once they understand that this is going to be the demand.
Right.
You know, delivery and logistics services. I've seen many people that the Corona, COVID-19 suddenly completely dropped their middleman. Shops were closed. How do you sell when the shop is closed? The shop that is selling your stuff. So many people had to find solution of shipping directly to customers. And once they've figured it out, even when shops are going to be back open and online, they still have this channel to ship directly to consumers. And I think this will continue. And we will see many technologies around it. Drones, for example, is becoming very, very prominent in delivering goods to customers. Instead of a person and the touch, you know, a drone can deliver the goods to your door. Online remote education. During the writing this paper, we talked with the Ministry of Education, we talked with some teachers, we talked with some supervisors in schools. And what they were telling us that they were trying to do remote and online education in high schools in the last 5 years without success, because the teacher said that they don't want to, and it's hard, and it's and so on. And suddenly they said within 1 month, everyone was teaching online. And now that they've passed this obstacle, it will, you know, I'm sure it will continue.
Right. Can I take us maybe a bit of a different direction? And Yoram, it's good to see you again. I think we met last time, 2 years ago?
In an apartment in Samara.
An apartment in Samara in Russia, where we were watching football for the World Cup. But it's, like I said, it's good to see you. I actually wanted to ask you about being in the business world. We know the economy has a lot to do with how it affects our chances of reaching a peace agreement Israelis and Palestinians. And I wonder what you see about development in that realm. What's the role of business as you see it, economy, changing the economy for Palestinians and Israelis in achieving some kind of peace at some point soon, hopefully?
I honestly could not have asked for a better question. And if I can ask Shannon to share the other slide I gave you. So one of the things that I'm a member of a group called BTI, which is an initiative Breaking the Impasse. It's a group of Israeli and Palestinian business people that have tried in the last few years. We are working with the sponsorship of the World Economic Forum in Davos. And we've tried in the last few years to connect businesses between Israel and Palestinians, understanding that we are not politicians, and politicians will have to figure out what to do here. But at least in the meantime, we want to have people feel better and work together and just have better lives until the politicians figure out what to do. So we've done this for a few years, but what happened in the last September, which is about 10 months ago, we grouped together Israeli and Palestinian in a small team, and we created 7 what we call in business KPIs, key performance indicators, for the next 5 years for the Palestinian knowledge and information economy. And what you see on this slide are these 7 KPIs. And I will just go through them quickly, or at least some of them, to give you some example of what I mean by KPIs. For example, the first one is that we want at least 2,000 Palestinian high-tech professionals to work in multinational regional companies. Today, just to give you the numbers, about 600. So we are looking to triple that number to 2,000. I'll explain in a second how we plan to do it, but at least I want to just show the objectives first, the KPIs. By the way, the reason it says, I want to touch a sensitive point here. What we're doing is sometimes perceived not very well by people on both sides, or by BDS. So we are trying to tread very carefully and not mention Israel where we don't have to mention Israel. So when we say regional company, it means Israel as well, but we're just not saying Israel. We say regional companies. But back to the KPI. So the first one is 2,000 engineers. The second one is at least 100 multinational companies, high-tech companies, employ Palestinian. Number 3 is not about high-tech, it's about knowledge work. Knowledge work is, you can look up the term in Wikipedia. Knowledge work are people that work with data. It could be doctors, lawyers, architects, and so on. We want at least 1,000 of them working in international companies. The reason for that, by the way, is that by working at an international company, they can later bring back the knowledge into Palestinian companies. Number 4 is about joint projects between Israelis and Palestinians. Joint project is not outsourcing. This is not Palestinians working for an Israeli company or an international company like number 1 above. This is actually a joint project between the 2 companies on both sides. Number 5 is hard because universities are usually the main stronghold of people that are trying to object any relationship between the 2 people. But we believe that using Israeli Arab professors, we can have some collaboration between Israeli Arab professors and Palestinian professors. Number 6 is about the Palestinian high-tech ecosystem. We would like within 5 years to see at least 5 Palestinian exits of startups, or IPOs, or international deployment, and at least 10 significant investments from foreign investors in Palestinian companies. And finally, we would like to see 2 industry events, international industry events in Palestine every year. So this is the list of things that we would like to achieve in the next 5 years. And the last thing I want to say about this is that it's great to, and by the World Economic Forum, we took it to the Palestinians, to the Israelis. We got the blessing of both sides, and we got everyone excited about it. And now we need to execute. So we spent the last, we finished the process in January, and in January we defined 16 projects that we are working on this year. I'm not going to go with you through all the projects, there's no time, but the 16 projects are for 2020, and they should take at some work. Interns. We created a program for Palestinian interns led by Yadin Kaufman, who is one of the members of our team. It's a program to allow Palestinian students, interns, to work in international companies. And I don't think I need to explain the benefit of that. Brings the knowledge back to Palestine and so on. And again, there are 15 other projects and yeah, sorry.
That's amazing. I just want to say, if anybody has any questions, this is the time to ask, as we're going to bring Sam in the next couple of minutes. But this is incredible because I know when we started Majdi and we said this is a company that'll have Israelis and Palestinians in our tours in Israel and Palestine, we were often mocked by a lot of people who say this is not going to work. Now, we did this 10 years ago, so we were ahead of the curve in many ways. And today, as you mentioned, I see more and more people talking about joint companies, not just as I remember the earlier peace plans would say, we're going to create cheap labor among Palestinians for Israelis, Israeli companies. And I always thought those were the worst ideas to bring peace, because just giving Palestinians to become the cheap labor isn't really going to bring peace. But joint projects, that's something totally different. And it's nice to see more and more people getting in that direction.
Yeah, and one of the things that, back to what the cheap point that you talked about, that usually makes me upset, is that we get BDS pushback on trying to get Palestinian engineers to work for Israeli companies, which is a good income job, while they have no problem whatsoever with Palestinian construction workers working for Israeli companies, where the pay is much lower. Doesn't make any sense to me, but
yeah. So we have one question from Lorraine List. She says, is the tech infrastructure in the Palestinian areas as robust as in the rest of Israel? This is a question either of you actually could.
Yeah, it's not. And to be honest, the level of tech education in Palestine is not as good as in Israel. This is not to say, actually, on the contrary, there is no potential in Palestine. I mean, again, I know many Palestinian engineers are amazing, okay? They just don't have right now in Palestine the infrastructure or the university education at the level that we have in Israel. And that's something we want to fix. Some of the project we're doing is to fix that.
Well, thank you, Yoram. I know, Kim, if you have anything else before we move to Sam.
No, just to say thanks, Yoram, for joining us. And we're going to be moving you to an attendee, but please stay with us if there are other questions for you later on.
Move me gently so I don't.
Thank you. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
We're moving to you. How was it to be an attendee?
I've attended many.
So Sam, can you also start by telling us a bit about yourself and what you're doing today?
Sure. I'm a Palestinian American born in Youngstown, Ohio. Relocated, actually studied and worked in the States as a software developer for a period of time. When the Oslo Accords were signed, I actually picked up with my family and relocated to Palestine, working to establish the Palestine Telecommunications Company, which is the largest private sector employer today in Palestine, responsible for all the infrastructure and telecom. And after that, I went on to get an MBA, actually at Tel Aviv University, between a joint program, Tel Aviv and Northwestern. Had established, prior to going to the program, a consulting firm here, and continued with that when I came back from this 2-year program, and continued to work in consulting. Was hired to put together the first large-scale Palestinian retail outfit. Everybody here calls it a mall. I don't. It's a plaza. I called it the Plaza Shopping Center. And that was built during the Second Intifada, which was a rather challenging time to build a fresh new project with a glass facade on the front of it. But we were successful in doing so. And now I'm back full-time into consultancy, business consultancy at the strategy and investment level, but I spend about 30% of my time in civil society. Our state of affairs here is not a normal country that is developing normally with all the growing pains that other countries may have. We have additional pains that cause us to have a shift in our priorities. And so that 30% is basically the time that I spend working on those abnormal kind of priorities that are imposed on us, above and beyond having to try to make a living and hopefully creating jobs, because that is key to keep Palestinians here in Palestine.
So can you start us with, Israel had much more resources to deal with the coronavirus. The Palestinian Authority doesn't have the amount of finances to give unemployment to Palestinians, to give, like just the Israeli government, I think, authorized some extra payments as well. While in the Palestinian side, this reality, like you said, doesn't exist. So what's the current economic situation for Palestinians in the coronavirus era?
To answer that, Aziz, I need to put it in the context, because COVID for us is just another layer of those abnormal kinds of pressures that are put on our society. We have actually three layers that are very distinct. One is 53 years of a military occupation, which has systematically aimed at damaging not only the economy, not only fragmenting the geography, but also physically stealing resources like stone and marble and gas and petroleum and whatever other resources we have. So we are at a significant disadvantage. Yoram talked about land. Yes, land is one aspect, but land is also agriculture, and land is tourism, and land is a lot of things, which happens to be the core of the conflict, which has been systematically addressed over those 53 years. So we've been facing that before COVID ever came to life. In addition to that, ever since Donald Trump was elected president in the US, we have had an onslaught of an attack on the Palestinian struggle for freedom and independence, we would call a liquidation plan by the US and Israel. And that has taken all different shapes and forms. Partly, this is before COVID, Trump's actions actually damaged our healthcare system, withdrew money from our hospital network that USAID was serving for a very long period of time. So they've actually damaged our ability to have capacity to deal with the last layer that the whole world got hit with, which is COVID-19. When COVID came, the Palestinian side had this fragmented reality because of the military occupation. It had very limited resources because we've been attacked during the last 4 years in a very, very systematic and focused manner. And so we were left not only with dealing with COVID, but also to deal with not having control of our borders. As is known, we have about 150,000 Palestinian workers that go into Israel every day to work and come back home and sleep in the West Bank. They have to cross Israeli military checkpoints. So when the Palestinian government wanted to crack down, actually they cracked down on movement very early on, trying to get a grip on COVID. They found that the one place where they don't have control of, which is the borders, was the opening where a lot of workers were coming back in from Israel and actually infecting people on the West Bank. And this has caused a very large surge. So this is kind of the context of where COVID comes in. Some of the things negative that we've been facing for the last 5 decades came to our advantage. For example, Palestinians have a supply of food in their home always, because the Israeli military systematically would frequently close the Palestinians' ability to move, putting places under curfew. So if you look at an average Palestinian home, they're better equipped than the average home to deal with disruption of daily movement. Also, our cities and villages have been fragmented over the last 5 decades, specifically the last 25 years with the Oslo Accords. So every community had to build self-sufficiency. So to give you an example, a village that maybe historically used to come to Ramallah or go to Nablus, the main centers of shopping, now during the last 20 years were forced to build all the services they needed, from dry cleans to grocery stores, et cetera, in their village. That turned out to be helpful during the COVID time because everyone had services that were very close and walking distance basically from their home. The Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian government, did do an excellent job in communicating what COVID was about and why they were taking these measures. This is the first time that Palestinians were put under lockdown, what we call curfew, because that's the word that we're used to, by the Palestinians themselves. But they did it, the authority did an excellent job in articulating that, daily press briefings and things like that. They gained a lot of credibility at the beginning of the crisis because of that, I believe, open communication. Unlike during other crises where it's very hard to get information out of the government. So that served them well. So the first surge of COVID was kind of under control. We got hit by some of these workers coming back, and then we hit a second surge. And now we're either in that second surge or maybe a third one. I don't know how to keep track anymore, but definitely it's gone from having a rather decent control to having the same crisis that everyone else in the world is facing. We're hitting about 11,300 cases in this very small community and about 70 deaths. That's a lot for a tiny community of 5 million people between here and Gaza. Luckily, we have not seen a major outbreak in Gaza, partly because Gaza is a closed area, sieged by the Israeli military, and partly here in the West Bank is there's been a lot of attention to the camps, the refugee camps, to make sure that they have services that they need provided by UNRWA. And that's important because the density of the population in these areas, whether it's the refugee camps or Gaza as a whole, is one of the highest in the world, if not the highest in the world. So if an outbreak would happen in these areas, we would be in a very, very dangerous situation. To end on this, I mean, we do have ongoing policies coming out of the government. For example, last week and now this weekend, 2 days, Friday and Saturday, which is our weekend, we are in stay home and the police are out in strength, making sure that nobody's out on the streets. So that's 2 days every week. And we just came out of a 10-day full period of a close down. So when they see the numbers going out of hand, they are taking drastic measures to keep it in control because the capacities of our hospitals are very, very low compared to what it should be.
Kim, do you have something or can I do a follow-up?
Go ahead. I'll ask mine later.
You mentioned, I think Palestinians were almost surprised how well the Palestinian Authority have dealt with the crisis in the first month. I know Palestinians in the States were like, wow, look at us doing better than anywhere else in the world. It was something out of reality almost. People I was talking to in the West Bank in Gaza were also in shock about how good we were doing. But I've been noticing, at least in the last 3-4 weeks, a shift where people getting frustrated with the government, frustrated especially financially, as most Palestinians don't have the ability to handle being 4 or 5 months without jobs. My family in Jerusalem, who I talk to all the time, are struggling, seriously struggling, and their friends and their neighbors and people are starting to say, we don't want to close down. I saw that some governors actually were challenging the Palestinian Authority in Hebron and in other places, saying we can't afford doing this anymore. We don't know what to do, but we can't afford it. So what's happening with that, and what's the solution? How do we deal without these resources that you mentioned, with the occupation happening? What does the government is really able to do? And we see even in Israel, with the resources, we see thousands of people in the streets protesting. People are not happy there. So I can only imagine how it is in a place like Ramallah where you don't have those resources.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, again, we need to go back to the context. There's multiple layers to what's happening here while we're dealing with COVID. The entire Israeli plan to annex large parts of the West Bank have been included in this mix. And that is causing a lot of frustration because the political reaction to that political move on the Israeli side was to sever the relationship in terms of the agreements that were set up between the two sides. The Palestinian Authority, the PLO, not the Palestinian Authority, the PLO actually absolved itself from those agreements. Finally, I mean, Israel has battered those agreements into the ground decades ago, but finally the Palestinian side said once the coalition government Israel came together and in a document stated that they are going to annex, that was enough for the Palestinian side to say, then you have no intention to end this conflict or allow a Palestinian state to emerge. That caused Israel to stop sending Palestinian custom fees, which they collect on Palestine's behalf, and transfer it every month. That's a major issue because 70% of the Palestinian Authority's operating budget comes from custom fees that Israel collects at its borders, at its ports, because we're forced to use Israeli ports to import goods. And when we import goods, custom fees are paid to the Israeli side. The Israeli side deducts 3% for handling charges, which is a tremendous amount of money. And it's supposed to transfer the 97% every month to the Palestinian Authority. When they don't do that, and they many times have not done it as a collective punishment because they didn't like what the Palestinians were doing in the international arena, now they've stopped it completely. So you have the Palestinian Authority basically dwindling down to a zero budget because COVID has stopped the domestic income base, and the 70% of their budget that comes from abroad, from Israel, our money, has stopped being transferred. And then you have the donors who used to be engaged in filling the gap. Now every donor country is dealing with their own crisis, and donor monies themselves have become much less than before. So it is a perfect aligning of the stars, indicating a potential collapse at the government level. So it's not only about COVID, it's also about the financial situation that the annexation has invoked. And remember, all of this is happening in the context of 25 years of a failed peace process and 53 years of a military occupation. Because COVID happened, Israel doesn't stop occupying. They are demolishing houses, arresting people, drones are in our airwaves every day. Yesterday they entered into cultural outfits, Palestinian cultural organizations, and arrested people in Jerusalem. So the occupation doesn't let up when a natural disaster like COVID hits. So we're under so much pressure that it's amazing that there is even anything today called the Palestinian Authority. I half jokingly tell my neighbors, it's amazing we get up in the morning and say good morning to each other. That's the amount of pressure that is on this society. And some people in Israel may be taking a lot of pride that that's happening, that finally there's an unraveling of the Palestinian governing body. And I would tell them, think twice, because if this unravels, Palestinians have nowhere to run to. We will be back to where we started prior to the Oslo process, and that will be something that will be detrimental to both economies. So I can't really look at an economic discussion outside of the political context. I think it is blind for anyone living between the river and the sea to do so. However, I work in economic development. I wake up every morning trying to create a job. And that's the dilemma that we're faced with. We're trying to create jobs, but we have to keep the political context in mind. That's a huge challenge on every individual trying to do it. And I personally, although I don't encourage people to do business with Israel while the occupation continues, I kind of turn a blind eye when there's not damage being done, even though I think that the world is a very big place and Palestinians need to be able to attune themselves on how to engage the world directly and not being forced to go in the least resistance way, which is through an Israeli dealer to make business for us multinationally. There is some value there, but there's some damage being done as well. You can't find good marketing people in Palestine. Why? Because it's not needed when you're the outsourcer to a large-scale organization that has all the marketing tools it needs. So in a way, even the high-tech industry, not all of them, and I heard the previous speaker gave some good examples, but not all of them are beneficial to the Palestinian phase of our development. The phase of our development is liberation and economic development building to statehood. It's not about an individual making another $1,000 and getting another certificate. Although there is some value to that, it is not the stage that we are in. So I helped create, I actually co-founded something called Americans for a Vibrant Palestinian Economy, where we try to connect Palestinian businesses directly with American businesses. So we're all about connecting to the foreign market. This is too small of a market to deal with by itself, but we have to be able to deal with it with all the tools. All the tools require good education. And one of the negative aspects of this forced military fragmentation that we're living in is that Palestinians have had to build universities almost in every city. Way too many universities for such a small population. But that was the only way they can provide higher education, knowing that Israel can cut off travel between cities. That has caused a cannibalization of our teaching staff. So that has reduced the quality of education across Palestine. Add to that, that Israel controls the borders. So they say who gets a visa and who doesn't. We're facing now in the Israeli Supreme Court several cases where Israel is denying our ability to recruit foreign teachers, foreign professors to come and teach. So if we can't bring in foreign teachers and we have a cannibalized local market, you can only imagine why the level of education is lower than it has ever been before. So this is the kind of complicated reality that we've been placed in. COVID is just the icing on the cake. The cake itself is much more structural and much more militarily oriented than a disease that will come and go.
And Sam, within these challenges and complications, are you hopeful for the economic situation or even just the financial situation of the community in Palestine, in Ramallah?
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't be speaking to you here on this call and all the other calls I've been part of if I wasn't hopeful. I'm hopeful for many reasons. One, I'm a strong believer that military occupations cannot live forever. That's what history has taught us. And I actually think Israel made a mistake, a big mistake, with this annexation move. And they've opened the Pandora's box and it's not going to be closed again. So we can only hope that the international community puts more and more pressure on Israel to end the occupation. I'm hopeful because if that's my starting point, that the occupation will end, we are building a state that needs everything. And I focus a lot on infrastructure because I think there's a lot of business opportunities now to get companies foot in the door so they can learn the reality on the ground and start planning, because infrastructure has a long lead time, and start planning for the types of infrastructure that we will need. I mean, I was part of building Paltel, which is the telecom infrastructure, but that's only one. We have everything from a road infrastructure to ports to airports to a very simple one. Due to a lot of pressure by Israel, a lot of the multinational payment gateways like PayPal, do not allow Palestinians to have accounts. So if the largest payment gateway in the world is boycotting Palestinians, is closing its door to Palestinians, you can see how the opportunity that COVID presents to do more online business actually becomes a hindrance for the Palestinians to play catch up. Having said that, I mean, there are efforts to create, I got confused between PayPal and PalPay because we also have PalPay, which is the domestic alternative to PayPal. So there are opportunities being created because of some of the restrictions placed upon us. Just today, I received from Jerusalem a business plan that I was asked to comment on for an online app. I can't talk about it, but it's about to be launched. That only came up because of COVID. So we do have a lot of opportunities with this youthful generation, and they want to be part of the world. They want to be, they want their careers to take traction as well. And those that understand that they work within a context are the ones that keep at it. Those that think they got a contract with a multinational, so there is no occupation, internet is great, are usually the ones the first to emigrate out of Palestine when things get bad. So we want people to understand their context, remain engaged constructively in economic development in order to help us not only build the state, but contribute to ending the occupation as well. Aziz, you're on mute.
Oh, looking at the questions, and let's see, we have one. Can you explain more about the PayPal account? We're getting a question about that. What's a problem? Are there other accounts you can do instead of PayPal? Why PayPal wouldn't do exactly work with Palestinians?
Good question. I would point to the hashtag PayPal for Palestine, PayPal, the number 4, Palestine. This is a multi-year effort that we've been engaged in. I actually was part of the start of it, where we approached PayPal and said, listen, you're the largest gateway. We could find alternatives, but you're the largest platform. And we want to know why Palestinians, through our banks, which are totally internationally compliant, are not able to be recognized by PayPal. They gave us, I won't go through the whole saga, but they started out by saying we're too small. So we went to their websites and we found Pacific Islands, which are tinier than us, that had service. So we went back to them. The story changed. It was because of the risk factor. And we went back and we looked at the details of the risk factor, and it's the same risk factor that our banking system has. Our banking system is Basel II and Basel III compliant, which means it's internationally compliant. I can send you in New York a bank transfer only because the international banking system recognizes Palestinian banks. So we told PayPal, where exactly is the risk then? So they had many different reasons why. There is not a good reason, especially given that they do allow illegal Israeli settlers across the West Bank to open up accounts with PayPal. So they are discriminating against people in the same geographic area. So we're hoping, and there's a campaign out there for this, and we would hope that people talk to PayPal, and I've written letters to them, and we've met with them in Washington to say, listen, this is about doing business. This is about being fair to Palestinian entrepreneurs and traders who want to be able to sell and buy products online like everyone else. You don't have to love Palestinians or love our struggle, but you shouldn't penalize us because we are in a struggle. And that's kind of the way that we're feeling, that we're being penalized because we have another overarching kind of campaign. But ultimately, this is the Palestinian business community not only talking to PayPal, but talking to Google as well. They just removed Palestine off the Google Maps. Talking to American Express as well. In the old city of Jerusalem, a souvenir shop from a Palestinian owner does not have access to American Express, whereas in the Jewish quarter, they do. This discrimination by multinational companies, especially those that carry a big mantra of non-discrimination with the LGBTQ community in the US or the Black Lives Matter community, why when it comes to Palestinians, all of those morals and all of those grand statements kind of are pushed aside. And it requires civil society to speak out because that should not be allowed at the end of the day.
Thank you, Sam. I think we reached the end of our conversation today. We appreciate you and Yoram joining us and talking to us about the economy, about the political situation, about the issues you just have raised. And many of our travelers, some of them who are listening to you today probably have met you on one of our trips. So thank you, Yoram. I see you are here as well. Thank you for joining us as well. And before we finish, we have to show a couple of things. Shannon, can you take us to the photo, I believe? Yeah, so we talked about photos of markets, and Yusuf sent us a photo of a market in Jerusalem, the Old City Market. This is where I grew up shopping for my Eid clothes every year. The Muslim Eid is, to me, it's a Palestinian Eid, since that's how I grew up with it. The Muslim Eid is coming up, next week? Exactly in about 5, 6, 7 days. And so this is where people would normally shop, which right now isn't unfortunately happening. But this is a picture from that market carrying the bagels, Palestinian or Jerusalemite bagels that are very special. And like usual, the winner will get a copy of Crossing Boundaries. And thank you. And Kim, next week.
Yep, next week. We're actually continuing the episode Count on Me that we had previously with Daryl Davis and Arno Michaels, and we're actually replacing Daryl with Todd Allen. We're going to continue the conversation, the race relations, the Black Lives Matter. There were so many questions on that previous episode that we just had to have another one and continue that conversation. So please join us. And
I just started reading Arno's book, recent book, and it's incredible. It's very powerful, and it's something to consider getting. And I got to know Todd more recently, and he's a professor who teaches on those issues and leads trips working with us now on our trips on the civil rights issues. And so I think we will have a really amazing conversation talking about some of the issues that we didn't finish talking about last time. So please join us, ask your questions. Even if you want to send us questions ahead of time, please go ahead and do that.
And thank you again for our speakers that joined us today, Sam, Yoram, very interesting conversations. And again, I think, Yoram, you said you'll send a few links on the chat, so you can send them to me as well, and I'll make sure that it's on our next email to everyone, so if you'd like to further read. And Aziz, you always have this final statement.
It's not where you travel, but it's how you travel.
Bye-bye.